Hey everybody, this is Mr. Bob coming at you with another APUSH video. Today we're taking a look at topic 6.9, which as you can see the title there, it is Responses to Immigration in the Gilded Age. Once again, don't forget that the Gilded Age is synonymous with the age of industrialization and the late 19th century, so don't let that trip you up a little bit. Now, we've talked previously about how there's going to be a massive increase in immigration to the United States during this time period. A lot more diversity in that immigration, particularly those that are coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe, Catholics, Orthodox Christians, Jews, a lot more immigration coming in from Eastern Asia, particularly China. Now, that's going to come with some very important reactions, and we kind of hinted on some of this last time, but, for sure, there's going to be a clear and obvious racist based opposition to this immigration. Labor unions played a pretty big role in opposition to some of this immigration, especially if any groups were not very keen on joining a union. Obviously the big, goal of a labor union is to look out for the needs of workers, and that includes maintaining, relatively high wages. And the concern was that immigrants coming over with few options and few choices would be willing to work for cheaper rates and therefore drive down the cost of labor for everybody, including union members. There was also a sense that business owners had some degree of fear of immigrants because there's going to be this pretty nasty association, particularly with, Eastern European immigrants, that they were associated with politically radical ideas, socialism, communism, anarchism, and they would be in cahoots with unions and lead to strikes and other, labor disputes and things like that. So both management and labor had some qualms with immigration for sure. There was also a widespread nativist fear that immigrants coming to the United States would be threatening the traditional white Anglo-Saxon Protestant dominant culture of America. That's, standing for the acronym WASP. And so the idea is you've got Catholics coming in and Jews and Chinese folks that don't speak English and that aren't Christian and yada, yada, yada. And so there was this sense that, traditional values are going to be destroyed. It's going to be, thrown out the window with all these different ethnic, cultural beliefs coming in. And really, really showing you the level of racism at this time is that this is probably the height in history of what you would kind of call this race-based pseudoscience that existed. And, there was, this sentiment amongst scientists that you could look at certain physical traits about people based on skin color and, shapes of noses, for example, and all sorts of things, phrenology, the shape of the brain and whatnot, that you could actually then identify how certain races and ethnicities are inherently superior to others. And, based on this, just total garbage science, that's totally racist in its foundation, there was a sense of, well, if you allow these people that are, non-whites or Jewish or non-Protestants coming in, these are, biologically inferior people, and they're going to, mess with America's superior gene pool or some other nonsense like that. So there's a lot of just racist garbage mentality that is really, really a response to a lot of this immigration, unfortunately. Of course, this is going to peak to some degree with the Chinese Exclusion Act. We already talked about this previously, but once again, it's going to be a total ban on the importation of Chinese labor, and that's going to be in place for about 40 years almost. Going hand in hand with that is going to be the contract labor law, which is going to make it now illegal for American-based companies to have foreign residents, people that are living in other countries, sign temporary work contracts and then come to the United States to fulfill those contracts. Once again, this is the idea of trying to keep the immigrants out as much as reasonably possible. But no, the immigrants, as we said, they're coming in, and they're coming in at what is going to be at the time record numbers. So, despite the attempts of some nativists to try to keep all immigrants out, there will be immigrants coming in. However, there will be a growing degree of regulations and rules that are going to be required of immigrants to become legal residents and then potentially citizens of the United States. And this is going to be through what we call processing centers. Now, there's going to be a number of them across America, depending on, what port of entry you're going to be it Boston, Baltimore, New Orleans. They had Angel Island on the West Coast near San Francisco. But the most famous of them all, of course, was Ellis Island in New York. And if you were an immigrant coming through Ellis Island, as you can see here, this was a heck of a process. You can see people waiting in long, long, long lines. You think it's bad at, Kings Island or Disney World. Whew, pretty bad here at Ellis Island. You got folks that are waiting for days trying to, go through processing. And there was a lot to processing. They needed to know your name. They needed to know where you were from. They needed to know your age. They needed to know a lot about you. And a lot of it was physical examinations. As you can see here, there was a big concern about communicable diseases during this time period. Remember, this is still a time where you've got smallpox and scarlet fever and typhoid fever and measles and, all sorts of stuff that were easily spread. And the thought was, well, you don't want people coming in bringing those kinds of diseases. So physical examinations were a major part of this. One of the more well-known examinations was the eye examination for something called trachoma, which is a very, at the time, very communicable eye disease. And back in those days, without proper medication, it could actually lead to death. So trachoma was a very common one that they were looking for. As you can see here, I mean, they're doing all sorts of investigations. Do you have tuberculosis? Do you have, rheumatic fever? I mean, anything and everything. They also did a certain degree of mental examinations to see if somebody is, mentally fit, aka are they showing signs of just clear mental illness trying to come to the United States. They would make all sorts of designations. Is so-and-so pregnant? Is so-and-so have blindness? They did all sorts of record keeping in terms of this process. And, it had, even though it did take a while, it was pretty remarkable, how many people they're going to be processing, millions of people processing during this time period. Now, the vast majority of immigrants that went through places like Ellis Island were allowed to come through and start a new life. But it certainly sends the message clearly that America is not just going to be an open door country in terms of, hey, we're just going to, as long as you show up, you're good to go. And note, the legacy of this to this day. I mean, there's still tremendous controversy about, who should be allowed to come in, under what process, and all that kind of stuff. So we are certainly seeing this, this clear movement towards, regulating who's allowed to come into the United States legally. Now, in addition to that, as we've said before, we know that a lot of these newer immigrants are going to be entering the United States, and many of them are going to be staying in urban areas like Chicago, Detroit, New York, Boston, Philly, you name it. And mostly because these folks didn't have money to go elsewhere. They knew that's where the jobs were. There were already the beginnings of some ethnic communities and neighborhoods that were popping up, as we mentioned before. But note also that these recent poor, very vulnerable immigrants are going to be very, very, very easy targets for political manipulation. This was certainly the glory days, the golden age, if you will, of political machines and political bosses. Basically, the way that this worked was that, in these major cities, and we'll just use New York as an example here, every major city was dominated by a singular state and local political party, most of them affiliated at the time with the Democratic Party, like in New York. And basically what they did was control all of the public services of that city. So, if you are the Democrats and you run New York City, you got to keep in mind, since the Republican Party has no real chance to win there, it's a one-party system. And so it's not so much the candidates that get elected that have the power and the influence, it's the people that are actually the bosses of the party organizations themselves that actually are running these cities. And, probably the most famous or infamous of these is going to be this guy right here. This is William, quote-unquote, Boss Tweed. He is going to be the head of what is known as Tammany Hall in New York. Tammany Hall was the nickname of the Democratic Party headquarters in New York during the Civil War and into the post-Civil War era. Now, political bosses like Tweed were able to control, like I said, all aspects of public services, be it fire departments, police departments, garbage and sanitation, health services, educational services, construction of infrastructure, you name it, anything on a local level, these guys ran it. And, basically what these guys would do is run operations where nothing got done on a local level unless you grease the palms, so to speak. You know what I mean? You just, you make a little donation to your friends at Tammany Hall in order to get things done. What we're talking about is bribery. If you wanted to become a school teacher, for example, you had to bribe or make a donation to Tammany Hall to get a teaching job. If you wanted to get hired for a bid to build a bridge in New York City, you had to grease the local party bosses to get that bid. So you had to basically pay a bribe to be able to get a construction bid to build bridges or roads or whatever. So, fraud was rampant. Bribery was rampant. Elections were commonly rigged. You had dead people voting. You had people voting multiple times in a given day. And immigrants play a role in this because they're going to be very vulnerable. It was not uncommon for a political organization to find immigrants and provide them with access to a job or housing or, something along the lines that they would want in exchange for their votes on election day. So the idea being is that, you've got your job, maybe you're working at the dock somewhere and you got that job because of the local party boss, and that's great. You're happy to have a job, but that party organization is going to remind you in advance of election day of who hooked you up with that job. And if you don't look out for your friends that got you that job, in other words, if you don't vote for that political party, funny thing will happen. You'll be out of a job very soon. Or the rent's going to triple or whatever. And so these folks are going to be able to manipulate, governments to basically run very corrupt organizations, basically threatening democracy. The last thing I wanted to touch on real quick here, is the impact of settlement houses, which are basically going to be early social service centers for new immigrants. And the most famous woman associated with this is going to be Jane Addams, you see pictured here. She is going to be running Hull House in Chicago, which is going to be, probably the epitome of what a settlement house would be. So what do settlement houses do, or what did they do? What they basically did was provide all sorts of important social services for new immigrants to the United States, like child care, English language classes, stenography class, not stenography, but, teaching people how to be a secretary, being able to provide, homeless shelters, all sorts of services, like here's assistance on what you need to do to become a citizen. You're a resident here, but here's what you need to do to become a citizen, providing assistance for that. So it's all of these kinds of services that an immigrant would need to be able to make it in this new country where you don't speak the language, you don't know the customs, you sure as heck probably can't trust the government in many respects. So this is going to be a way to try to bridge that gap. And it's also going to play a pivotal role in what's going to be the emerging social work industry of the future as well. So anyhow, those are some of the important things to keep in mind when we talk about responses to immigration in the Gilded Age. All right, we will see you next time. Bye-bye.